This is the first episode of season 12 of The Trust Show and the first episode of 2024. And I decided to start with a bang. This episode will blow you away. Today's topic is artificial intelligence avatars, and how we will talk about them is in the trust aspects. We're seeing the proliferation of deep fake in both voice and visual. Processing power and algorithm complexity reach such a level that you can see a video of someone you know do or say something you didn't expect from them, except that it's not really them. It's an AI avatar rendering. That's how you use it for evil. How about using it for good? How about creating an AI video of yourself that is customized for anyone you send it to without having to re-record a separate video for every person? Just like CRM allows you to create customized email messages. In this episode, my guest is Jill Schiefelbein. I should say Dr. Jill Schiefelbein. Jill is an innovative AI researcher, a partner and chief experience officer at Render, a startup specializing in producing hyper-realistic avatars and being a one-stop shop for digital likeness creation and management. Jill is also the founder and president of the Dynamic Communicator, Inc., a boutique communication strategy firm. She's about to release her fourth book, Business Communications for Dummies. Yes, it's one of those yellow and black books. Jill is also a friend of mine, and I've known her for about 7 years now. But before we start the episode, Jill wanted to say something.
You're about to meet my human counterpart, the real Dr. Jill Schiefelbein on The Trust Show. And when she's with host Yoram Solomon, she'll be talking about technology like me, a hyper-realistic avatar, and if I'm an AI communication technology that can be trusted. The real Jill wanted to show me off a little bit first, so she rendered this video for you all to see. But now, I think she wants to be back on stage, so I guess I'll turn it over to the real humans to get started.
Are you blown away? Jill actually rendered this avatar by typing into a screen right in front of my eyes. It took less time to create this video than it took for you to watch it. So now, let's go to the show right after this. Welcome to The Trust Show. I'm Yoram Solomon, your host, the author of the Book of Trust, and facilitator of the Trust Habits Workshop. My mission is simple. I want to help you form habits that build your trustworthiness, because the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can I trust you? And we're back with Dr. Jill Schiefelbein. So first of all, congratulations, Dr. Jill Schiefelbein.
Thank you. Doing it a little later in life was actually a wise decision for me. I know it's not for everybody, but I'm glad I did.
I know that was the same for me. The first time I signed up for the PhD program, I woke up one morning, cold sweat, realizing I'm leading a $100 million business unit with 89 people. 2 young girls. What am I thinking about? I got off the program. Later in life, I got back to get mine. But I know how exciting it is at the end of your dissertation. And I watched your dissertation defense and I read your dissertation. So watch out. I know.
I'm ready for it. I'm ready.
So, first of all, I think you proved one thing right. And that is, to have a good dissertation, it doesn't have to have 348 pages. You have a relatively short one, but it's really a good one.
No, thank you. The program I went to at the University of South Florida is an executive doctorate in business program. And what I really liked about it is your dissertation, number one, it had to be practice focused. So if you didn't have a practical business application context, you couldn't move forward. And then the other thing was they were more concerned about the results and the implications for practice, of course, being well supported by theory. But page length, unlike my master's program, was not an issue here. So it was great.
Yeah. And, first of all, the reason I'm interviewing here on this, or we're talking about this here in this show, is this is obviously the Trust Show, where we talk about trust. And more specifically, I recently started my own secondary, well, it's more than secondary, research on Trust Premium, and specifically the use of trust and the importance of trust in the sales process. And your dissertation was really focused on that. And so the first question that I have to ask is, tell me why. Why did you decide that that's going to be your topic?
What's really interesting to me, and I just need to rewind back a little bit so people really understand, at least to me, the gravity of the topic in my world, which is at the intersections of communication, education, and technology is where I've found my home. And even when I try to kind of veer away from it, I'm like, no, I'm not a techie person. It always comes back around. And in the very early 2000s, so over 20 years ago, 2003, I actually built my first online course. And the passion for that, and that was very early back in the online course days, like incredibly early. And the passion for that came from, like, I'm from a small town in Kansas, grew up in the 80s. And if I wanted to learn something, I didn't have video options. There weren't tutorials. There weren't remote classes. It was, if you were lucky enough to find a tutor, great, or you go to the library and you try to read through books. And for me, it came from art. I loved, still do love, art. And I was actually pretty talented as a little kid. Like, my mom very much encouraged it. My dad as well. I won national competitions, was doing all these things. And finally they found a painting teacher in my little hometown in Kansas. 8 months later, she moves. So this talent cannot be fostered. I feel just let go. And, I move into other things as I, age and find gratification in different things. And when I started to learn about distance learning, and the first thing was like the correspondence courses, right? Where people go and they sit in this big room and then they're streaming, through some type of connectivity, this thing, I realized that this could change the game for people based on geography, based on where they live, based on physical abilities, based on, do they need a caretaker? Do they have to take care of kids? Whatever it may be, right? So I became invested in creating the best online course experiences so that people in any of these situations didn't receive any less of a quality of education from, being in their situation. And at the end of the day, it was all rooted in communication, which is what I did study, what I got my master's in, all of that. So, fast forward to 2009, first live virtual event, fast forward to being an early adopter of Zoom and being in on, early there. The technology that I researched here is that same passion, because I believe it has the ability, through what I call a hyper-realistic avatar. It's basically a custom avatar. It's your digital likeness. It's your digital clone, to be able to help people provide more accessibility, provide more personalized and customized experiences for people, provide choice to their customers, and really democratize the video production process and create a more level playing field in many ways. And that's why this was so important to me.
I should add to our audience, our listeners, that we've known each other for, I think, about 7 years. If I remember correctly, it was 2016 when you came. We're both members of the National Speakers Association. Although it sounds so much better when I just say we're both members of NSA and leave it at that. But you came in and you talked about videos. You did a lab. You talked about videos. You talked about classes. I have to tell you that my first online course I created as a result of you coming here to Texas. And
oh my gosh,
of course, then I learned that you don't use a 720p or a 720. Yeah, it was a 720p camera on top of your computer. You need to use something a little better. But tell me, so you told us a little bit about why you did the study, but how about, there's a question. I asked you if there are any great questions I can ask you. I like this one. Yeah. Why are people hesitant to trust AI-generated communications?
What's really fascinating about this idea of trust, especially in this world of AI, right, and generative AI and everything else, is number one, there's a whole lot of media fluff about it because, titles and headlines get clicks, and a lot of people don't read beyond that, so they make assumptions based on what they read. So that does spur a huge trust issue. But I think the big thing is because it's different. So let me give you an example, right? Like, ChatGPT recently turned 1. Right. And so if I were to start talking about, this revolutionary technology where humans now have the possibility to portably transmit information in a new form from one person to another. And before they were sanctioned at a desk, or sanctioned with certain supplies, but now they can, pull information and be able to communicate it quickly. And maybe it has like a refillable source of potential, so you can keep communicating with it. And if I keep explaining this in this way, it's kind of esoteric, but most people assume that you're talking about ChatGPT, but the same similar phrases were actually used in an 1827 patent for the refillable ink reservoir in a pen. And just like that technology and every other communicative technology throughout human history, it has been met with both awe and fear. It has been used for both good and ill. And I mean, hello, printing press, right? Can we talk about the uproar that was the printing press? So when we look at this is just, we're repeating history, as history is wont to do, right? We're humans. We have certain biological imperatives, survival among them. And anything that threatens our known concept of the world is going to cause questions. What most people who have fear on this or a lack of trust in this are doing, though, is they're not actually examining other areas in their life that they probably use every day that they have assumptive trust. For example, when I get an email from you, Yorm, I believe and trust that it is you who wrote it. I have really no way to verify that, right? It's coming from your email. It's coming from your domain. It's coming from that. You could have had a team member write it. You could have had many people write it on your behalf, or someone could have hacked into your account. I don't know. The only time I would be suspicious, and I think this is for most people, is if something seemed off in your communication pattern. That would be the time where suspicion would arise, and you might verify at that point in time. Now, with AI technologies today and generative AI, people, instead of the trust but verify mentality, like I would be talking about here, it's let's question, where we're humans. Any AI output is based on human input. So whatever you put into it dictates a variation of what you're going to get out. So we need to kind of check our trust, immediate gut reactions at the curb when it comes to this stuff, and really understand why people may be using it and what the intent of using the technology is for.
Yeah, and this it kind of resembles the opening of my last TED talk when I talked about ChatGPT in that TED talk, and we have this allergic reaction to any new technology. It was calculators in schools. Right now, they're blocking ChatGPT. And I tell my students in college, just go ahead and use it. So, in your dissertation, you said, I saw the defense, I read the dissertation, and you said something that I found very refreshing. You said, well, I'm supposed to be able to reject null hypothesis, which is, a whole thing. The way you don't actually prove things, but you reject the opposite. So you were not able to reject the null hypothesis for 5 out of 6, but you said, I don't care. I still got a lot from it. Tell us more about it. What did you get out of that research? What are your conclusions that made you think, oh, that's interesting?
To rewind a little bit, and I know you'll post the link to the recordings and everything for anyone who's curious on this to go down that rabbit hole, or you can always just reach out to me, everyone. But this research of hyper-realistic avatars, like, you saw earlier in the introduction part when, if you were watching, and if not, you just kind of heard it, it's a hyper-realistic version of self, to the extent that when people watched a 2-minute video of Avatar Jill on a white background, 67%, when asked a semi-leading question, did you just watch a video of a real human or a hyper-realistic avatar representing a real human? 67% said it was a real human still. So this is how realistic we're talking about. And it's not, people would say, oh, well, they weren't paying attention. Well, no, actually that group scored the highest on the quiz after watching the video. So no, they were paying attention. So this is the realism level we're talking about. And my big idea was, okay, can this be an efficacious communication channel? Or in non-geeky words, is this thing effective, right? Can we use it to communicate information? And I couched it within a sales context, which we can definitely talk about more if we want, but directly to the heart of the research, I asked, in looking at 3 different versions of this video, I created a script that was an informational learning tip for salespeople. My audience was salespeople, 290 verified participants at the end, which is a very decent sample size. And we did this with both survey and biometrics, where I was watching them watch me and have analytics on biometric algorithms to measure engagement, facial expressions, eye motion, etc. So those three groups were real Jill, avatar Jill, and avatar Jill who says that she's an avatar at the beginning. Right. And of course, me thinking like this is going to be the most trusted version ever because, man, she did her job right and said what she was. Exact same script, exact same look and feel. I created the human video the same day as I created the avatar using the same outfit, same hair, everything. So it is, you can't tell them apart if I take screenshots. You're going to be hard pressed to pick out the real Jill. It would be a guess. So they watched this video and then they completed surveys. I tested information retention. That was one of the variables. And that's essentially what did you score on a quiz after watching. I tested engagement, which was on a domain independent engagement scale that has been studied extensively, corroborated through factor analysis and all these geeky things for anyone who needs that to trust me here. And if you don't, then yeah, just know it's geeky. It works. And then the third one is the Munster Epistemic Trust Inventory, which was actually created to measure a layperson's trust factor on especially digital content. So literally the perfect scale existed for measuring trust in this form. And the idea was that, there's going to be some differences, and there weren't. There were no statistically significant differences anywhere except in information retention between Avatar Jill and Avatar Jill that disclosed she was an avatar. And then when you look at the biometric data from that, it's because the assumption is anyway, I can't read their minds, but based on their eye movement patterns, they're like, wait, this is an avatar. And you're focused on kind of looking at this holistically and not paying as much attention to the content.
Yes. And, when I looked at the videos that you used, the prompts that you used, the first one, I immediately said, okay, this is the avatar. Why? But I had an advantage over your participants because I know Jill, and Jill uses her hands a lot when she talks. And then I look at the real Jill, and you made sure that you did not use your hands, so they look relatively same. And I thought, well, that is actually another avatar, but it wasn't. It was you. So while I knew the first one was an avatar, it was based on something that I knew that others didn't. And with the second one, you didn't help me. So those were amazing prompts, by the way, video prompts. And I hope my audience, I hope that you'll have time to actually look at those videos because they are amazing. And in the dissertation, you actually describe the process of creating them, but I have to tell you, it is amazing. Let me ask you another question. You focused on B2B as opposed to B2C. I would have thought that this would work more in B2C. Why did you choose B2B?
And it may. I don't know. I mean, this technology is in its infancy. It's still in this, innovator state. And with that, you're still at really low adoption rates. I have been in this space for over 2 years, which makes me like an OG in this technology, which blows my mind, right? I was a very early custom avatar adopter. And why I personally focused on B2B is, one, for the program, I needed to have a specific context, but most of my clients have B2B sales. And they are working and doing this in a way where what I find in B2B is, number one, it's less research than B2C. So that was attractive to me. I wanted to contribute to, the knowledge base and business to business sales more from that perspective. But also what I find in B2B sales, and this is a challenge that many of my clients have, that is different from B2C sales, is that we know if you zoom out and look at hundreds and hundreds of studies of what makes people buy, what keeps people loyal, how you retain business, how you get referrals, how you get elected, all of these different things in different fields, personalization, customization, and choice are three key factors that continually emerge in the top 3, 5, and 10 in hundreds of different studies. And so looking through these things in B2B sales, if you're a medical device salesperson, let's say, right, and you're selling directly to a doctor or directly to a hospital administrator, that is B2C. You already have a highly personal relationship, and communication is most likely coming from you the majority of the time. Now, doesn't mean this couldn't help you, but why I chose B2B, aside from my own personal interests, is that in B2B sales, what you often have is, let's take the travel industry, for example. So let's take a cruise line. that it has regional sales directors. These regional sales directors are responsible for getting in and educating agencies and travel agents about the product so that then they can sell it to their customers, right? Which is the ultimate traveler. So you have a B to B to an NC. With this, brands, large cruise lines, small cruise lines are creating a ton, plethoras of training and content so that they can get advisors up to speed, because most cruise lines still, their business from advisors will trump their business from direct to consumer market, because it's a scalability thing. It's how they get out. And what's really interesting about this and growing these markets is you have all this content coming out to advisors from hundreds of travel partners all the time, right? How do you differentiate yourself? By personalizing that communication, by customizing that communication. So instead of, hey, Cruise Line XYZ just released a new training on the new ship that we're launching next year, it's, let's say I'm your regional sales manager, talking to you. I'm like, Yorm, I'm so excited because, our line has just announced this new ship. There's tons of new training information in the portal. You may have gotten an email about it from the company at large, but I wanted to make sure personally that you knew this, because especially for your audience of XYZ client base, this ship is really going to meet their needs. For clients, WYT, not as much, but I encourage you to look especially at, section 2 of the training, because I think you'll find that the most useful. Well, now as an advisor, I'm like, that was targeted to me. It was personalized. It told me what to focus on, and it put sense in my context. Now, as a B2B sales rep, you can't do this with all 150, whatever of your accounts, but you can create one script that has a field for name, a field for what part you want them to watch, a field for what audience it will hit, a field for what it won't work for. You put that data together, you merge it, mail merge style, into multiple scripts, and bam, you have personalized communication directly targeted to everyone to increase the likelihood that they are going to consume the content. Because we know from science that we not only do business with people we know, like, and trust, as is appropriate here, but we also learn differently from that, and we take actions differently from that when it's communicated from a source. So if you can get your social presence out there to reinforce the relationship. I give the analogy when I talk a lot that it's the same thing as, we meet once in person and then we friend each other on social media. It can be years between when we see each other, but because of that social presence relationship, even though it's not you directly, I am able to still learn more about you and feel presence in a way that when we do meet again and reconnect, the relationship is stronger than it was when we started. This is the same idea.
Right. And, in my trust model, the thing that accelerates trust, one of the things that accelerate trust is what I call intimacy. And intimacy is when you stop communicating via email or just the written word, and you start adding the tone of voice, and you add body language, facial expressions, and that significantly accelerates the building of trust. Now, the tools to customize the email, for example, today, they exist. I mean, every CRM system, almost every email client that's a little more than just your web-based Gmail account, everything beyond that allows you to put all those fields. But if I had to think about every customer recording a separate video for them, that would
you would never do
unbelievable. And now you're making it customizable. Let me ask you another question. How about interactive? Those videos are pretty one way, but how about the interaction? Did you think about that?
In terms of live real-time interaction? Yes. Okay. So for live real-time interaction, with this technology, the speeds of generation aren't there yet. Now you can get some generation with like a cartoon kitschy looking avatar, but to me that doesn't serve the same purpose. And, there are different studies in education and learning, things with chatbots, et cetera, with what is called embodied technology. And is it the embodiment of a human or some random figure, or is it the embodiment of self? And those are two very, very different things, a separate rabbit hole. But with that, we're looking at right now, and what's really exciting, so what's coming in the new year is actually we are getting closer and closer to having that interactive agent up. And we've started testing some different technologies that make it happen. The challenge that we're having is, and what is important on, to us at Render, it's digital likeness. And so if it's digital likeness and it's customized to an individual, I don't want it pulling responses from a generalized database. The value in that And the value in conversations and intimacy, as you call it, is really being able to pull from a database that is personalized to your own style of language. You put my avatar with something generated from ChatGPT, it is like, it's already technology layered on unedited, written, generated technology. It's not going to be a good outcome. But instead, as I'm privately training a GPT model with every book I've written, every article I've written, the recordings and transcripts of every podcast I've been on, the model can start to learn my nuances in language and use those to communicate back. So that if everything continues on path, is going to be coming in 2024.
Yeah, and it's really a matter of the evolution of technology. The two probably most important qualities or technology parameters are processing power and storage accessibility. And that was, by the way, the end of my third TED Talk when I said that right now, if you consider the number of neurons we had in our head and the number of transistors you have in, I think I used the Apple Air 2 processor, you have, or A2 processor, you are about, I think, 3 years away from getting to the point where $1,000 laptop would have as much brain power as you do. So it's really just, and this is something that I've seen overall with technology. So the fact that that the issue right now is latency, which means that tomorrow it's not going to be latency anymore, that opens a lot of opportunities. The interesting thing, I think, is that I don't know if you're familiar with Albert Mehrabian. I think it was either UCLA. He published a book in 1971 called The Silent Messages. That's where the 738 rule comes from, which is one of the most misquoted rule in history. But and if you look at the study the two studies that he conducted in 68 and 69, you can challenge that as well. And by the way, those were studies that are very similar in terms of what you do to what you have done, of course, without avatars, AI, because we're talking 1968, 69. But he said an interesting statement in his introduction to the book. He said, when our words contradict the silent messages contained within them, others mistrust what we say. So do you think that the use of avatars, even if as you use them there, and I think that the fact that there were no significant differences between the three different avatars would suggest the answer is yes, but do you feel that it conveyed body language, tone of voice, even though it was artificially intelligently generated, that is consistent with the words there?
Yes and no.
Great. So I see that you got your first lesson in being a PhD. You answer questions with yes and no, and it depends. That's the second level.
Yeah, I mean, let me rewind to the evolution of this technology, just give listeners kind of an understanding of how it's evolved. And this is something that, unless you've been in the space for over 2 years like I have, you're not aware. So when I first did this, and so the company that I'm a partner in, Render, I was actually paid customer number 2 in the company. I was the second person to jump on board at a much higher price point than what we're at now and say, yes, I am going to do this. And at this point, they were kind of, the co-founders, John and Moki, were playing around with it and like, can this be a thing? We think this can be a thing. And I'm like, heck yeah, it can be. I'm jumping in. And I was the one, the customer who was using it and getting results from it. And if you rewind it, it makes sense because from a communicative strategy lens, that's where my expertise is. Blend it with technology, bam, we have some magic. And so looking at that, what we had then was we wanted to be a best-in-class aggregator because there's about 4 major players right now, maybe 5 emerging on the scene in terms of who can produce a video avatar, and their levels of customization of those avatars vary. But what we found is one who was really good at video, like the voice was horrible. And it was so robotic. Or you couldn't even get your own voice. You had to pair it with a generic female voice or a generic male voice, and it wasn't ideal. So we built a platform where we can take best in class, whoever is on video, or for whatever need, right? So if latency is a need, there's some that process faster than others. So we can adapt that best in class audio and then merge them together. Over 2 years ago, this was a manual process. We would generate the video file, generate the audio file, and then video editors would put it together, knowing that the technology would advance, right? Like John and Moki had the foresight for this. And, then the use cases came on and I got invited to be part of the team. We saw then that it got down to, instead of, a day perhaps to turn something around, because of course, as a startup, you're not employing a team of 100 people that can just whip these things out left and right. We got it down to hours within a year of me being there. During business hours, it was down to hours. This was a pretty big improvement. And again, if you're wanting to send out these personalized emails, like, yeah, I can wait, a day to get all of these. I just plan in advance. Well, now we're down to minutes. And there's no human involvement in it from our team's end. Our involvement is on improving the app, keeping the APIs integrated well, making sure everything's running smoothly and all of that, which is not a light lift by any stretch of the imagination. But we are now down to minutes in getting this stuff out and paired together. So that's in 2 short years. In 2 short years, we have gone from only being able to speak one language to, if you wanted a second language or a third language, the only way you could do it was from a generic voice, right? Generic male 1, generic male 2, etc. To now, in my voice, with my intonations, I can speak fluently 28 different languages, which opens up the door for so many communicative possibilities, especially for global businesses. This is a lot of development in a short period of time. So when we're looking at this now, you ask about, how accurate is it in terms of communicating that? Because what I often say in trainings, not on technology trainings, but human communication is you have your actions on one hand, you have your words on the other. And if they are not synonymous, people are going to watch and believe your actions more than they are your words. So you can have the best crafted message in the world, but it's not going to mean anything if your actions aren't on board with it, right? So exact same thing to your point. With this, and this is one of the huge reasons that I believe disclosure that it is your digital likeness, disclosure that it is a hyper-realistic avatar, however you want to, your clone, whatever you want to call it. I don't really care, but disclosure of it is hugely important to me. And it has been since day one, because as you said earlier, like I speak professionally for a part of my career and I am animated, like I'm animated even here. And yes, in the video, I toned down my animation, one, to have a more comparable sample because that was important. But two, the vast majority of people using this technology are not professional trained speakers. The vast majority of people using this technology are executives, are doctors, are salespeople who are not on stage theatrically in front of thousands of people. And so you have to adapt, to that audience. So with this, the intonation is getting a whole lot better. The AI technology is getting a whole lot better at pairing intonation with things. It's not perfect. It's not perfect at all. However, what I find with my own business, separate from the data, and we can go into the data on disclosure next if you want, is that as long as I am transparent about what it is, nobody has a problem with it. Nobody has a problem with me communicating that way. Nobody has any issues. Nobody's coming back and saying that doesn't represent you well, or that doesn't look like you, because I'm forthright and honest about what it is up front. And I also like to put in a reason for why I'm using it. So while the real Jill is traveling abroad, while the real Jill is on stage right now, before you meet the real Jill in person, she wanted to send her likeness to tell you of some of the things you can expect in this call, whatever it may be. There's always not only the disclosure, but a reason for that communication. But
an interesting thing is that in your study, when I look at the results, specifically in the trust area, and I should say that you used a 14 item scale. And first of all, the numbers are pretty high in terms of, do you believe me, the 3 different components of, well, that's not my trust model, that's somebody else's trust model. But, you were getting 17 out of 20 on either one of them, 17, 16, 26 out of 30. So the level of trust was pretty high up there. But the difference, as you said, was pretty small between the avatar and the one where you disclose. So I know that you and I and many other people, integrity is very important. The disclosure is very important. But your research actually shows that it doesn't, right?
So it shows that from a statistical significant standpoint, there is no difference in trust from a numerical measured sense, from a quantitative sense. Right. The caveat here, though, is in the qualitative sense.
Yes.
And so what I did in the study, and just to kind of walk people through it, after they watched the video, they did the quiz questions, they did the engagement scale, they did the trust scale, and then they were asked if they had just watched a real human or a hyper-realistic avatar of a real human. After that, the next screen told them what they watched and introduced them to what a hyper-realistic avatar is, this technology, etc. And I asked one final question, which was, again, this is an audience of salespeople or people interested in gaining sales skills, right? To mimic if you were sending an informational video out to a customer, for example, they would have some minor interest at least in that product. So to mimic that, we captured that audience. With this, the results on that open-ended question are what really tell the story. And there's a lot that can go into this. So let me give you the data. And then if I can, want to contextualize it with some literature on some other technologies that kind of show a parallel historically to this. So when we do sentiment analysis, and sentiment analysis is basically where I put all of those open-ended text answers into, a massive thing divided by the three groups and looking at, okay, so after I tell them what it is, how do people feel about this, right? How are people, maybe thinking about this, what's in their mind? And the question I asked was, how do you see or not see, this stuff being useful for use in a sales position or use in sales communication? And what blew my mind here was that the people who watched Real Jill and then learned about hyper-realistic avatars were actually pretty dang positive about it, right? In like 81-ish%, right?
But have they watched the avatar as well, or they only?
They could click on a video to watch it. It wasn't mandatory to watch it, but they were educated about it. So whether they watched it or not, I couldn't record that data with the software that I was able to use for university guidelines. So alas, another study in another non-university setting where I can capture some of that data.
Yes.
But with that too, 81% positive sentiment's really dang good. Anything above 50% when you're looking at aggregating a whole bunch of sentiment on text, something even neutral can be considered positive. Anything over 50%, you're like, all right, this is exciting. But then we go down that rabbit hole a little further, and I ask the same question to the people who watched my avatar video, and then found out that, again, 67% thought it was real human. Then they found out that, it's actually not. It's an avatar. We're talking plummeting, like 160-degree turn in sentiment to like 84% something negative sentiment. That's catastrophic to a business, right? Catastrophic. Now, the third group that disclosed that we know didn't score as well on the quiz, but still engaged and trusted at the same level as the other videos based on statistics, they were at 57% positive sentiment about use of this technology. So again, you'd be happy with that as a business. You'd be like, all right, so clearly I need to disclose. So the risk to business is now, okay, we know disclosure has some negative impacts. In my study, the negative impact was you retained less information. There's tons of studies in chatbots, if we want to go into a lot of that trust literature, and I'll let you guide that discussion if you want to go there, that has varying impacts on trust and on results because of something, one of the factors called algorithmic inversion that we as humans tend to have, and it's a form of bias. My thing is, though, I don't believe a business can afford to not disclose because the potential cost of non-disclosure way outweighs the potential cost of disclosing.
Yes, and there's a whole different area that I talk about often in what happens when you find out, because the problem is, if you can guarantee 100% they will never find out, then this is not a question. The thing is that they may at some point. And this is where disclosing upfront versus disclosing after the fact versus it's not even, and that's actually an interesting question. So you said disclosing upfront, that was one of your three groups. We disclosed upfront, this is an avatar, you're watching an avatar, that upfront, I'm not hiding anything from you. But then the second group where you had the avatar without it being disclosed, there's no issue until the moment you said you actually watched an avatar, which in this case, you said it to them, but in other cases, they would find out themselves, which I would guess would be even worse.
Yeah, the words duped,
Yes,
fooled, dishonest, words like that came up regularly in those open-ended responses. And it was huge. And what's funny is, my one of my professors on my committee said, I've never been so unexcited to get so many failures to reject the null. But what it did is it caused me to actually go deeper into other data. And I don't know if I had found significant differences, I would have been, writing those results, doing repercussions of those results, analyzing those results further, and not actually going in as deep to the sentiment. And so that was, to me, that is probably the most significant finding in the entire study, was that.
yes, and it is, and I think that people really need to wake up. You're trying to fool someone, and you're assuming that they are fooled. I think that the interactivity part of this is going to be important. And you talked about the AI not being, or AI avatar, specifically three-dimensional or visual avatar technology is not there yet to interact. But I can tell you, it's not there yet even in text form. I just recently I received an email asking me to contribute a class, a course, a video course on detecting wireless networks using whatever, I don't remember the name of the technology is, and they thought that based on my LinkedIn profile, I would be a perfect candidate for that, which is bull, because there's nothing in my profile that would suggest that. And my reply, I decided to be a little sarcastic. My reply was, I would be happy to do that. Thank you for offering this. If I only knew what this technology really is. And I got a response to that. Thank you for agreeing, and here's the process. And I'm like, you completely missed my answer here. And I think even that technology is not has not evolved yet as such. So let alone in a visual instantiation. Let me ask you a question. You talked about the company that you're a member in, Render, I believe, or a partner in. And can you tell us a little more about the company and the process itself of how you generate, or how I could generate based on, customized messages? How could I generate videos, or how could you, the viewers, can generate it?
Yeah, so the process to get your hyper-realistic avatar, right, this customized avatar, your digital likeness, does involve first and once and only once a physical location experience, right? So we have on-demand studios around the United States, and are constantly adding more cities and partners. And then we have studio events where we'll do special. I get to, come in and do a speech, and we have cocktails, and it's lovely. And I enjoy those nights too, because we get to play together as a team, and I love speaking, so it's great. Educating is my jam. But what you do is you have about 90 minutes. One time, 90 minutes in a studio, hair, makeup, the whole works, even on gentlemen, because it does matter in the production of your likeness, because it's at 4K quality and you really want to make sure things are accurate. So with that, you spend the first part doing your video cloning. So video cloning and vocal cloning are two very separate processes. And as I mentioned, we are able to, with what we produce from our studio, onboard you into any of the major video avatar cloning engines. So,
and those are all yours?
No. We partner.
Okay.
So, Synthesia, Colossian, Hagen, DID, out there, we have agreements with them for using their video engine technology, and we have API integrations into our application, which basically means for non-computer people, it's like, hey, we can use this, and we found a way to make it talk with best-in-class audio, which who we're using now is Descript, but we also 11 Labs. We've played with Descript. We still have integrations with others as well. So with this, if you wanted to go out and do this on your own, and let's say you went to Synthesia first, there's a process that they use that's unique to them. Then you wanted to be like, hey, no, I heard the latency on Colossian is actually way less than Synthesia. So, I'm going to go and do that? Well, you're going to have to go through a whole separate process and pay production a whole other time to make that happen. But our team has created a process where you come to the studio and we gather footage for you that can be used with any of the major players in the space right now. As of the end of 2023, of course, there may be more that come in and we may have to augment that going forward.
You're talking in December, so by February, it's all going to be different.
And that's I love about this space. It constantly changes, but what will never change about it, and this is where I think, I've always found my home, is the way humans interact and engage at a fundamental level, the way humans communicate at a fundamental level doesn't change. How it manifests in the channels we use change. And so I'm always applying this, historical, well-researched, scientific base of knowledge to, distribution and dissemination through new channels and technologies. So then after you do this video cloning, which involves a teleprompter, doing certain motions, doing certain audio recordings, repeating things, what we do is then take you to the audio studio. And in the audio studio, you are recording audio, and it only takes about 15 minutes actually in the audio portion. And we have different prompts that you use. You do different stories, different things with your voice. And then from there, it's separately generated processes. It takes between 1 and 2 weeks, depending on the footage, a week to get it all cleaned up and packaged and everything else, because there's a lot that goes into that. And then to get it generated. So in about 2 weeks, bam, you have your digital likeness, and you log into our application to do your render, appropriately named for the business. And that's what it's called when you render. What you do is you go in there. If you have multiple avatars, you select your avatar that pairs it with your voice, and then you type in or copy and paste any script you want. If you want to use GPT, we have an AI sidekick integrated. If you want to translate into one of 28 different languages, we have 2-click translation through AI that is what we have found to be the most accurate translator AI out there. We've tested it a lot. Nothing with AI is perfect, so it's obviously the onus is on the person to verify. But we get that out there, and then the next step is to select your background or a green screen. So if you want to do post-production editing, I love to take my avatar and make her small in a corner and have like visuals and graphics on the screen, because that's just better for consumption. You can do that. Otherwise, you can pick any background you want in a stock library, upload your own background. I custom brand, like the one for here, and then you click submit. Minutes later, you have your video, and then that video can be downloaded directly from your dashboard, or every video is generated with a custom landing page that you can have call to action buttons, custom links, view tracking, all of those things to make it super easy to distribute that content. So it's really this like encapsulated solution. So 90 minutes physically of your time plus transport to and from a studio is all you need to really have this ability. And the use cases from our clients vary from people who are using it every single day to people who are using it as an insurance policy, unexpected illness, surgery, out of the office, travel delays, but they still need to convey their presence and stuff. They have this as a backup plan. I did not anticipate that use case, and I think it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. My backup, by the way, if I, for some reason, illness or double booking or something, I can't make a keynote, I use Matt Damon instead. I send him, and people can't tell the difference. But so you,
it's always good to have a strategy.
So, or at least that's the plan. I mean, I haven't missed a keynote yet, so I haven't called him to ask him to fill in. But so far, the setup, the creation of the likeness initially would have to be something that's done in the studio, both the video and the audio.
Yeah, there are options where you can do it at home on a webcam. The output is just not what, for a professional video, is not what you're going to be happy with.
And if I have, which I do, a video studio up here in my house, would that be helpful? Would that change and make me capable of doing everything here?
You could do a lot of it here at your place, depending on the camera quality and the frame rates, and then also the equipment with the technologies, the prompters, the video prompters, et cetera, for both video and text, because there's 2 types of prompting that go on. It could be done, but the coaching on how to get the best output is what's there. And that we know of. We have produced more custom avatars than, now other companies have produced stock avatars, right? So they obviously were producing these to be a stock version, but actually custom avatars of people were in the hundreds, which is more than anyone that we know of out there right now. And I will tell you, from when I did my first one to even my second, the difference was astronomical. The second to the third, insane. I'll do my fourth one in Q1 next year. And I'm just so excited to see how it turns out, because I mean, we have learned a lot. Anyone who comes in through our studio process, you get, I've created lots of video training to get you prepared and mentally in the state for what you're doing. Because, you know, people, especially who are used to speaking and using their hands a lot, number one, a lot of people who use their hands a lot, actually, there's no point in them using their hands. They just do it because it's a thing. But the other thing is with the technology, well, I want my gestures to be specific, because when I'm on stage, they're all specific. It's AI technology. I can't guarantee that if you're holding up this, you know, I don't say there's 5 things to do. You can't do that with the technology. And I have no idea where these balloons are coming from. This is insane.
Not from me.
Great. Yeah, this new iOS, I just upgraded. So apparently there's something in the video there. So surprise.
You probably
everybody.
said the word congratulations. Let's see if it happens.
Yeah,
again.
right. Congratulations. You know, I haven't gotten the balloons before. That's really fascinating. So in any event, you know, AI, you know, it's a form of predictive analytics right there is what's happening with motions. You got it wrong, Apple. You got it wrong there. But with this,
don't say that.
Really, yeah. It's really how you can actually do your gestures best to make a great avatar at the current state of the technology. And when people follow that instruction, they get really great avatars. Some people really want to push it, and the avatar is good, but some of the gestures just really don't match up well with what they're saying. And they're like, well, I need a different gesture with this. I'm like, and this is exactly why we told you not to do that gesture in your training footage.
Yes. And so if I understand correctly, I'll repeat that. It starts with a session at the studio, maybe 2 studios, one for visual, one for audio.
Same space.
Yeah. And then you create my likeness. How long does that typically take from?
The whole process is about 2 weeks from once you're in the studio to when you can use it.
So in 2 weeks, I'm getting this dashboard on your portal. And from that moment on, I just type in text and it generates a video. And your recommendation would be disclose the fact that it's an avatar up front.
Absolutely. And, you know, disclosure. Can we go down the disclosure rabbit hole for just a second?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Definitely.
So disclosure in AI, it's a huge topic. It's part of Biden's recent, you know, October 30th, 2023 executive order on the safe, trustworthiness, fair uses of whatever. It's government. It's a long, long title. You know, the executive order on AI. You can just Google that if you're interested. You'll find it easy. But with that, disclosure is actually a part of it, to the extent that that disclosure will end up manifesting from a legal standpoint is still up for debate, because some would argue that if it's your likeness, there is no legal reason you would need to disclose. You don't legally have to disclose if someone else, like your assistant, is writing an email for you. So why would you have to for this when you own that likeness? So, you know, there's some, you know, areas for the debate there. But going back to, from a business standpoint, the best base of research that we have, both scientific and then anecdotal from business, and then non-scientifically validated business data that comes in. The best data that we have to compare trust and disclosure to AI-generated outputs is in the world of chatbots. Now, in the world of chatbots, earlier studies, when they were emerging and people weren't aware of their existence, showed very different results than studies that are done now, 5-6 years down the road, where it's more normative. Chatbots are more of a known entity. And I believe that we will find the same things with my research, that when someone, hopefully, you know, 2-3 years from now, at the rate this is moving, where someone does even the exact same study that I did, I believe that we'll be met with different results on the disclosure. I actually think the information retention would be about the same as everybody else, right? I think it'll be mitigated. I think what the eye movement showed is that people were like looking all over the screen at different parts of the body. You saw furrowed brow a little more, like trying to, you know, identify things. So when chatbots first emerged, the research was like that. People couldn't believe they were interacting with a bot. And then when they did, of course, they still had the feelings of being duped, etc. Hundreds of studies have been done. If you're interested, there's, 20 or so cited in my lit review, and some of those are aggregate studies that you can go in and you look at it, and depending on the situation and context, we still have algorithmic aversion today. So even when the chatbot is 4x more effective than an entry-level salesperson in getting results in a business, if it's disclosed, that plummets because of, again,
if
algorithmic
it's disclosed
aversion.
after the fact.
No. Well, they did studies with controlled groups that, of course, one, it wasn't disclosed at all. They just kind of like with my avatar, they watched it. And then one where they disclosed, and then they used a real human. The chatbot, without disclosure, produced 4x of the real human. The chatbot that disclosed plummeted.
Yes.
And was lower than the real human. Again, because of algorithmic aversion and bias that we have towards AI technologies, even though it was effective in other areas. And the same with giving advice for chatbots for advice giving. If it's a relatively minor issue, people's trust in chatbots are high. If it's more to your example with the email that clearly was AI generated and failed, if it was more contextual and more nuanced, then of course it didn't perform as well as a human. What these studies then now recently have started doing, and this is in the past year, really, it's come out, is, okay, well, how can we disclose to be what we would consider ethical and, have integrity, the word you used earlier, I like that, and still, and mitigate the impact? Like, what things will help us mitigate the impact? And a big thing was, well, if there was a legitimate reason for you to be using a bot instead of a human, for example, we are doing this because if we're able to help this way, it's going to lower costs of your product. That's a legitimate reason. And if that savings is passed on to the customer, that can change people's opinions towards interacting with AI technology, et cetera, et cetera. So what's found is there needs to be some type of mitigation factor in that end. So what I'm doing next, and the study is already in IRB, Institutional Review Board, for those of you not in the academic sense, and I want to do it through the university just because the rigor that goes with that is just much more not only credible, but useful to everyone once that research gets done. Is
plus the IRB process itself is a very comfortable process to go through, pretty much like a colonoscopy.
Yeah. So it's, you get a lot of out of it. That's really what happens. But it does make your research stronger. Like, we have to give it to it. They're there for a reason, to protect participants. And with this, what I want to find is, okay, so now with this technology, what is the best way to disclose that you're using an avatar to mitigate the impacts? Like, what way can I disclose that will mitigate the information retention? Because a lot of people are using this to communicate information. That would be the number one thing that I would want to improve on and still be ethical, and have integrity in my business. So the next study has same exact video, so we can really compare apples to apples. But Avatar Jill that doesn't disclose, Avatar Jill that discloses in the script, and then 3 other types of disclosure, including lower third, on screen, and on page. And so now we'll be able to see really scientifically, here's companies, how you can disclose the use of this and have less impact. And I'm so excited to get those results. I'm hoping Q1 everything will be ironed out.
Yes, and we already talked about that as soon as you have that, we're going to have you again on this show, because I'm dying to know what the answers are. For the audience, just so that you know, we use the word IRB, well, because we're both PhDs, but in case you don't know that, IRB stands for Institutional Review Board, and that's a review board of researchers within the university that look over. One of the most important parts is, what did you disclose to your participants? Because it's all about the safety of the participants. There have been studies done in the past where the participants were duped to a point where it actually caused them damage, and the university wants to make sure that doesn't happen. That's why we go through the IRB process. I don't know if you can talk about that. What is the price of the process of working with your company?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Right now, what you do when you are getting an avatar with render is it's about $1,000. It's $1,000 production cost, and that's pretty common. If you were to go to a studio and hire all the things, it's pretty flat. Yeah, I mean, $1,000 to produce the digital likeness. You have $1,000 annual licensing fee for the technology, and this is standard. No, that's standard across all 4. So now you're looking at basically a $2,000 cost to get started, right? That's your point of entry. And then we have subscriptions. So it's a monthly subscription after that. It starts at $200 a month and goes up from there. And depending on the quantity of videos you're wanting to render, that changes, and your use cases, et cetera, which is what, I advise on in terms of, what number do you really need? What are we really going to do? Do we want to, roll out slow? And then just like the old cell phone minutes, as long as you're an active customer, if you don't use it all, it rolls over. So what we find is typically, the first month people are just kind of playing, experimenting to see how it turns out. And then, they come in with all these ideas. And I always try to say, just have one to get started. But they come in with all these ideas, play around the first month to see what the output is like, and then determine of all these ideas they had, what one they then want to do first. So it's a fun, I love what I get to do because I get to help people communicate in strategic ways, which is what I've done for over the past decade of my life. But now it's with this like cool new sexy technology.
Yeah, whenever we talk and I see the passion that you have, it reminds me that you heard the statement, if it's worth doing it right. And I always add to that, if it's worth doing it right and with passion. And you always show the passion in what you do. You talked about, you brought an interesting point. I didn't think about that before, that our attitudes are going to change over time. So, for example, when I finished my TED Talk, they asked me for a description, an 80 to 100 word description. And so I wrote something, but, I just write. And before you know it, I'm at 230 words. And so I went to ChatGPT and I asked it to shorten it. So it did. Then I asked it to make it more exciting, which it did. And then I thought, that's brilliant. I'm going to send it to them. But then I thought, you know what? Even though I don't know how much people care about how the description was generated, the last words in the description in parentheses were edited by ChatGPT. But that's today. 6 years down the road, as you said, I think we're going to be in a position where somebody is, whether you're going to be required by law to say that this was generated and based on what you know right now, probably better to say it up front than at the end. But we're going to be in a position where somebody is going to say, wait, this was not artificially generated? You mean this was the actual person doing? Why? Because we're going to get so used to this is what happens. At least, and in your dissertation, you talked about Bloom's taxonomy and the bottom two layers. At least at the bottom two layers, I think that this is what people are going to expect. They're going to expect that you're going to, just for the sheer quantity of the number of videos going out instead of emails, that you're going to use something like this. And it's at the higher layers that they're going to expect that it's going to be really you.
Well, I think one of the things that excites me the most about it, and this is where my view from technology will differ from those who approach it with a little caution, is my first look on any new technology isn't how will it be used for ill, because we know it will be. We know it will be, and that is not something that we have direct control over. Period. End of story, right? Like if the technology exists and is out there, it can be used for good, it can be used for ill. And so, what my friend, she's a consultant, Helen Appleby, she calls them like boiling the ocean problems. Like if you focus on that, and that's, I go and give speeches on this. And one of the first questions every time is, well, can't people use this for this? And I'm like, this is a boiling the ocean thing. You're trying to control something that is completely out of your control, right? We as humans may have influence over it. Like people who are producing the technology could put in safeguards or different things. But, if there is a will, there's a way. People are going to find a way to use something for good or for ill. So that aside, my first thing with technology is how can it make me more human? Which sounds very weird, but that is one of the first things. So like when Zoom was first coming out, and I told you, I think it was 2009, I ran my first virtual presentation speech, right? Which again, way before the vast majority of it. And in 2016, I was telling you guys, you need to be doing webinars and all these things, and people laughed at me. Well, we know what happened there, but the idea here is like, how can technology make me more human? And I look at stuff like this, and there is a fine skill and an important neural skill, neuroplasticity, neural pathways, et cetera, to writing and creative writing and expression and all of that, in the same way that there are neural pathways and logistical reasoning skills that go with learning the process of math, understanding the basic underlying principles of mathematics, right? What are the order of operations? How do we do these things? How can we calculate things relatively quickly? but the technology exists to help us do this more rapidly with a calculator. So why would you not use a tool that can give you an advantage when you understand the underlying? The problem with education today, in many cases, is people don't understand the underlying. So for me, I look at technology as it can make me more human because it is taking the lower level tasks, the lower level mental tasks off my plate and allowing me to use my brain to more of its capacity. I care to use my brain at more of its capacity. For those who don't, my belief is that we'll start to see more of a divide in kind of the mental space because of the tools that allows. But people who are afraid of it, to me, it's look at yourself. Why are you actually afraid of it? Are you afraid because you're going to need to work harder or work different or change something within yourself? Or are you afraid for it for a more legitimate reason? Because I'm sorry, having to change something or fear of it taking over a job, like, yes, there is a security need, right? We need to eat. We need to feed ourselves, shelter ourselves, all of that, going back to Maslow, right? Good old Abraham Maslow. We love him. But with this, it's instead, if I'm not spending time making outlines for every single book chapter I write, what can that time be used for? Well, it can be used for me writing better stories that are only from personal human experience, that are only from existing and living. This latest book that I'm under contract for is, the For Dummies series, like Real Estate for Dummies, Accounting for Dummies. They asked me to take over Effective Business Communication for Dummies. So it's a pretty big deal, major brand, very excited. I was trying to write a chapter on nonverbal communication, something that, of course, when I was at the university teaching business comm, I taught all the time. Not a topic I do regularly in my environment, right? Like nonverbal comm makes its way into presentations, but I'm like staring at this blank page, ordering an old fashioned because clearly my mind needs something to make me more creative. Then I'm like, Jill, this was actually November of last year when ChatGPT just came out. I'm like, why don't you go to ChatGPT? So I asked it, what are 10, I didn't ask it to write for me.
Yeah.
I used it as a prompt. What are 10 questions that business professionals often have about nonverbal communication? And of that list, it gave me 5 questions. Then I simply voice dictated the answers to those questions, boom, had the text, and then started editing it from there. So I saved my brain a lot of processing power on a routine task, and it's still my expertise that's on there. I just had a prompt. Ironically, I prompted a machine prompted me.
Yeah. And it's there was a part here that it's almost as if you took it out of that TED Talk that I talked about, because it was a TED Talk about ChatGPT. And this is what I tell my students. Layers 1, 2 of Bloom's taxonomy and layers 1 for our audience. Layer 1 is knowledge. Level 2 is comprehension. Level 3 is when you start going to application, then analysis and beyond. By the way, Bloom's taxonomy has changed. I think it was in 2001 or 2011. Now the top layer is creativity. And I tell my students, use ChatGPT layers 1 and 2. It frees your mind to think about the higher layers where ChatGPT can't help you. Jill, this has been great. This is one of the most insightful interviews that we had in this podcast. If somebody wants to know more about you, about what you have, about what you do, where do they go?
My name is really fun to spell, as you can tell from the screen. So I am everywhere on social, LinkedIn included, at Dynamic Jill. So that's the easiest way to get in touch with me. But Jill at rendermedia.ai is my email. And I know you'll put that and everything in the show notes. But genuinely, these conversations are important to be having. It's really essential that if you're going to go into this space, I always tell people, have a strategy for it. Don't just go into it because it's cool. Because then you're going to jump in and then you're going to jump out pretty quick because you're going to be like, oh, the technology is not quite there yet. But when you have a strategy and you've identified a use for it and you know that you are able to be now more human because you're providing better customer experiences to your customers and guiding them in their exploration of content with you, whether that's training internally, something external in sales, or a myriad of other contexts, like it changes and you can get very, very excited about it. And that's where I geek out. So don't hesitate to ask.
Okay. Once again, thank you for being on The Trust Show, Dr. Jill Schiffelbein.
Thank you, Dr. Yorm.
Didn't this leave you wanting more? Let me summarize the trust aspects. Intimacy accelerates building trust. Seeing me as opposed to reading an email from me should accelerate trust. With AI technology, and specifically AI avatar rendering, I can create an avatar that looks like me and therefore send a visual of me. It should accelerate trust. But does it matter if you know that this is an avatar and not really me? Does it matter to trust? Does it matter if you knew up front that this video was an avatar, or if I told you at the end? What if I never told you at all? What if you found out on your own? What would that do to trust? Well, we're going to have to wait until Jill completes her new research and then bring her again, because it will be interesting to know what is the impact on trust when it wasn't disclosed to you that the person that you saw was in fact an avatar. Of course, there's always the question of whether people will just accept the use of avatars just like they accept the use of calculators, of spreadsheets, Google, Wikipedia. Will it change how we look at trust? But for now, that's it for today. May trust be with you. I'll see you next week. This was The Trust Show.
If you enjoyed this episode, like it, subscribe to this channel, and get informed when I release more episodes like that. And remember, the answer to this question will have the biggest impact on your personal and professional success or failure. Can you be trusted?